It's clickbait, dude. I don't want you to break any more taps. Nobody enjoys that. I would flat out love it if the last tap you broke is the last tap you ever break. And I've got 6 tips to ensure that you sidestep further breakages and start tapping holes like a pro, even deep, scary ones in thick plate like this. If you're just getting started in metal work and maybe you've got a fundamental handle on cutting bits of steel and drilling it, a natural dot joining sequence takes place, and tapping threads into holes is one of those next dots. You might also go down this track of welding and fabrication and things of that nature, but tapping is part of the picture and you need to be reasonably good at it. And shockingly enough, I just did the mental arithmetic and figured out that I've been doing this not continuously, but for 46 freaking years. Like, I walked into a factory when I was 15 and my first job was tapping holes in brass castings. And then suddenly, seemingly, here we are. Breaking a tap is easy and terrifying at the same time. It's easy because taps are brittle and they don't give you very much warning. They're easy to break. And it's terrifying because the implications of doing it are expensive and time consuming. Like, you might have hours invested in a part, and if you break a tap off, you often can't remove the tap because they are generally unamenable to being drilled out, or, most punters at home in their sheds, they don't have access to the kinds of machines that are necessary to remove some broken taps. Like, who's got a spark erosion machine just sitting on a shelf waiting for the next broken tap? If you are that dude, you're already a Jedi at tapping holes. So a broken tap often means just binning the part, which means a whole bunch of hours down the drain if it's a simple part like this one that I'm working on today, which is a fixture plate for a horizontal bandsaw. But if you're working on something expensive like an engine block or a transmission housing for some device, then this could be a multi-$1,000 mistake. It's a pretty horrific experience, so you need to stack the deck in your favor. This video is possible because of my 2 enduring retirement-preventing side hustles, getting new cars cheap for people just like you in Australia, and also the same thing with rooftop solar. On the new car thing, we specialise in mainstream cars, like the kinds of vehicles ordinary Australians buy. Utes, SUVs, cars, not Bentleys and S-Class Mercedes and things like that. We'll leave that to others, but we want to help ordinary Australians out, and we're match fit for it. See, the big problem for most people is you just don't buy cars very often. You don't know the rules of the game. You're not match fit. You're doing it every, 3 to 5 or 10 years. When we go to bat for you, we're doing this every day. At least it's a level playing field up against a car salesman, because he's doing it every day and his job is to get the best financial result for the dealership. Our job is to get the best financial result for you. And in fact, we don't even charge you a fee. We pass the savings on to you and we send the dealer a bill for delivering another sale that month, so that they're just one sale, your sale, closer to meeting their target. And if you can find a better deal, then hey, there's no obligation. With the rooftop solar thing, there's a slightly different proposition because there's so many cowboys out there and so many dodgy components. I've come up with a team that cuts through all of that. We use quality components, good installers, local support, things of that nature. You will get a quality system that delivers you a solid return on investment for years to come. And now's a really good time to act, actually, because the federal government's battery rebate has really just changed the fundamental economics of solar in the last couple of months, since July. It means thousands of dollars off. So the return on investment is even better than it was for me when I got my solar system about a year ago. You can add a battery to an existing system and cop the 3, 4, whatever it is for your particular battery, $1,000 worth of savings, or you can add a whole system, including a battery, and benefit in exactly the same way. If you've already got a battery, you can add another battery and benefit in the same way. The government's throwing cash at the moment. The least you can do, the polite thing, would be to catch some of it, I'd suggest, especially if, like me, you've been paying tax your entire life. If this is a benefit and you're entitled to it, you might as well make hay while the sun shines, because it's going away incrementally in the months to years that follow. So don't be delaying too much if you want to get the maximum benefit from that battery rebate. Links in the description to both of those, or you can just go to the website autoexpert.com.au and click on the Save Thousands link for a new car, or the solar link for a quality home solar system. And now back to me doing that. Use the right frickin' tap wrench, dude. Like, the problem here arises because if you buy a big box of taps, if you say to yourself, I'm going to get started tapping threads, I'll buy a big box of taps. They often come with these 2 tap wrenches, and it's all very confusing because there's such different sizes, and one of them is M3 to M12, the tiny one, right? And the next one is M6 to M20. And you think, well, I might just be tapping an M6 hole and I'm feeling tired and emotional. I might use the big leverage tap wrench, and it's compatible with M6. The problem here is, like, just look at it, dude. If you use this configuration, the huge wrench with the minimum tap, this is an M6x1 tap in that wrench rated for M6 to M20, I guarantee one thing: you will soon be standing next to a tower of broken M6 taps that will stretch halfway to the frickin' sun. It will be Icarus melting wax to fix his wings all over again if you go down this ill-advised path. The bottom line is you're just not going to get enough neuromuscular feedback, and the tap is going to let go and you're not going to feel a thing. You'll just hear a snap, and then all of a sudden you'll be binning apart in the last, 8 to 10 hours of work that you put in on getting it to where it is now. See, if you're actually going to use a big tap, this is a fine M18 thread tap, I think M18 by 1.5 or something. Fine for that, because you do actually need a bit of leverage to jam that into the right sized hole. But M6 to M20, you've got to be kidding. Whoever thought that was a rational specification for a tap wrench was smoking crack to excess. So if you want to tap M6, I'd suggest you'd be looking at a wrench more like one of these babies. Tap wrenches are horrible devices. It's very hard to find a decent one at a fair price. There's a lot of horrible ones straight out of China, made out of the finest ill-fitting Chinesium, and they are typically found in the big box O-taps that you buy. So you'd want to upgrade a little bit, but you do have to be a special kind of individual to justify the cost of probably the best executed shit design that is the tap wrench, which would be this one here from Starrett. This is a Starrett 91B. It's a beautiful thing, but very expensive also. So you'd have to be, tapping a lot of holes to justify the cost of a Starrett tap wrench. One other option is to get your magnifying glass out at the average flea market where there's a bit of a tool stand, and you might come up with something that's half decent like that, which is an old P&N one made in Australia, and it's been quite reliable and also not bad to use. They're a crap design though. Tap wrenches are fundamentally awful. All of them with these moving jaws like this, they're just terrible. They don't give you much reference for straight up and down, which is kind of critical to alignment. We'll get to that. But the main thing to remember is use kind of the smallest wrench that you can get away with rather than a big wrench, okay? So if there's no sizes written on the tap wrench, one really easy way to do it is to just open the wrench up, and if it only just kind of fits on the tap, then that's looking good, right? The other thing is if you're using a wrench like this and you've got to virtually slam its door shut to get it on the tap, that is nature reaching out and saying to you, dude, this is a bad idea. So always use the right sized tap wrench. Tip number 2 is a huge topic and I don't want to get too bogged down in it. The headline is use quality taps where possible. Where possible. A lot of people, they go into an engineering supply joint and they see a tin box that's overflowing with taps. It's seemingly got everything, metric coarse, metric fine, UNC, UNF, like the imperial equivalent kind of thing. And it's got dies and it's got tap wrenches and die wrenches, and they think, problem solved. And I'd suggest that's like 60% of the truth. So we might as well fit in the other 40% of the truth so you can get this in perspective. I've got a heap of boxed sets of taps, like probably 4, and they are really useful, but I use quality taps for the threads that I use all the time, and I do that for a reason. The box set of taps, and this is an M18 by 1.5, I think it is. It might be M18 by 2, probably not. 1.5 it looks like. Anyway, it's come out of the box set and it's got that trademark titanium nitride coating, that yellow goldy coloured coating, which is mostly marketing with a cheap tap set. It's there so that you start to believe that those taps are better quality than they actually are. The first thing to remember about these taps is that even if you buy quite a large set, you don't get the 3 taps that typically come in a quality set. See, this is a quality set of M10 by 1.5 taps. I got them from Hare and Forbes. They do a nice line in them. They can't spell, obviously, because I don't know if you can see that, but metric course, dudes, C-O-U-R-S-E. Who knew? But they are really nice taps. So I guess I can live with the spello on the label if the taps themselves are really nice. And these are really nice. They come in 3 variants in the same size. So you get a tapered one and you get a really blunt one, you get one in the middle. In Australia, we call them taper, intermediate and plug taps. And in America, you've given them different names of freaking course. I think you call them taper, plug and bottoming taps. So you use plug where we use intermediate, and it's all very confusing. But anyway, the ruly tapered one is used for through holes. So you just get your tapered tap and you wind it in, you wind it out the other side, you've got a full thread, okay? The intermediate and the plug tap are just for blind holes, which is a hole that doesn't go through something, okay? And generally, you don't use them except if you're making something a bit special, okay? So we'll leave blind hole tapping for another day because that's a bit complex. Anyway, the point being, with a big box set of taps, you don't really get a tapered tap and you don't really get a plug tap. You get a tap that's halfway between a tapered tap and what we would call an intermediate tap, and you get another tap that's halfway between what we would call an intermediate tap and what we would call a plug tap. All right, so that's kind of imperfect. And for this reason, I'd suggest that the boxed set is really good for having all your bases covered. Like you're pulling something unfamiliar apart, it's got some dodgy thread in it, you don't have a quality tap, but you need to chase the thread so that you can get out all of the gasket goo or Loctite or corrosion and all of the slings and arrows of previous servicing of whatever component. You can just chase that all out of there with your low quality tap. Works just fine. And if you've got a drill and tap the occasional hole in a size that you don't use very often, the big boxed set of taps is a great idea. But for the threads you use all the time, you should buy high quality taps, right? Because they won't break as often and they're just better in so many ways. I'll lay that out in a minute. But if you're just getting started in the metric universe here in Australia, concentrate on the coarse threads only. Don't worry about the fine ones. And my strong advice is if you're really just new to this and getting out of the blocks, go with M6 and M10, okay? Don't worry about 8, 12, and 16 or 5 at this stage. And the reason is really simple. It's because if you're getting started, you've already got one of these, guaranteed. Lay down Mazaire, you've got yourself a drill index. Typically they go from 1 to 13 in 0.5 millimetre increments, so you get 25 in a box. And the beauty of this is that in the box you will find an M5, like you'll find a 5 millimetre drill, and you will find 8.5. And they are the tapping sizes respectively for M6 and M10. And for most of the projects that most of us do in most of our sheds most of the frickin' time, M6 and M10 will be fine, okay? The problem with M8, M12 and M16, also M5, is that you don't have the tapping drills easily at hand, most likely. M5 needs a 4.2 millimetre drill, M8 needs 6.8, M12 needs 10.2, and M16 needs a 14 millimetre drill, which is fine, but your box full of drills maxes out at 13. So you have to go and buy a 14 millimetre standalone drill or a Deming bit set kind of thing. But whatever, don't go to the expense if you don't need to at this stage. Stick to M6 and M10. The final thing about quality taps is the material choice, right? The box set of taps that you buy on the cheap is most likely, each tap is most likely made of a thing called tool steel, which cold chisels and things of that nature are made out of. It's really useful, most likely in a grade like O1 or W1 sort of thing. So the material itself, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's more brittle. The thing you'll notice about these tool steel taps is that the threads are cut because before they heat treat the steel, tool steel is quite amenable to having the thread profile cut in it and having the flutes manufactured in it, so that's great. But it gives them a little bit more friction as you actually use them, and the edges don't last as long. And they're more brittle because they're heat treated like that. So if you want to break taps, use tool steel taps in all the sizes that you commonly use because they're more brittle and they go blunt, and that's a bad combination because if they're blunt, they require more mechanical effort to get the job done, and they're more brittle. It opens the door to you breaking the tap, okay? So reserve the cheap ones for later, whereas your high-speed steel tap like this baby here, that is a completely different animal, even though seemingly they look very similar. The threads are ground because high-speed steel is pretty hard at every stage of its life and not amenable to being cut. So the way to manufacture anything of high-speed steel is usually to grind it. And that increases the surface finish, and it therefore reduces the tool pressure. They don't blunt as often. They're not as sharp out of the blocks, but they don't go blunt as quickly, and they're not as brittle. So for the taps you use all of the time, most frequently, spend the extra bucks. Now, I'd steer clear of the specialist taps unless you really know what you're doing. YouTube is full of dudes using spiral fluted taps in their battery drills, I note. The problem with that is unless you really know what you're doing, you'll just break it because they're not the slightest bit amenable to misalignment in reasonably thick holes, okay? If you're just drilling, an M10 tap, if you're tapping M10 through a piece of 5 millimetre plate, you can get away with one of these in a battery drill, but I'd argue you don't have enough threads engaged to do a reasonable job retaining anything with that, and a riv nut would probably be a better bet. So your spiral flute tap its big trick is blind holes because it pulls the chips up out of the job. That's a subject for another day. This is also another kind of tap which is called two names, same thing. It's a gun tap, which is also called a spiral point tap, and it's basically designed for machine tapping on a milling machine or something of that nature as well. And its big trick is in a through hole, it gets the chips and it ejects them very effectively down through the bottom of the hole, so you don't have to worry about the tap binding, which is pretty much the issue with all of these style of taps, these straight fluted taps have an issue with the chips binding, which is why when you actually tap, you have to go forward and then come back a little bit to break the chip off to stop them binding. But anyway, just buy the set of 3 in the common sizes that you're going to use as high-speed steel, and for everything else, buy a box of taps. You'll be right. Tip number 3 is actually really simple, but it orbits a domain that non-machinists get confused all the time. They get completely arse about with this, and I don't know why, because it's so simple. This watery stuff here is XDP cutting fluid in this case, but there's lots of products like this. It's a coolant that you mix up from a concentrate. So you put water in here, you put in the concentrate, the amount of the concentrate you need for the job you're doing, and all of a sudden you've got something that is designed to keep a high-speed spinning tool that's cutting deeply into some material that doesn't just cave in at the drop of a hat. This keeps it cool, and that prolongs the life of the tool by stopping it from overheating, because water is really good at that, and a little bit of lubricity doesn't help. And then if you're spraying it on something expensive like a lathe or a milling machine, it's always nice if it doesn't rust afterwards, which is coolant, right? Tapping's not like that though. It's a slow process. So you don't need to keep a tap cool. You need to keep it lubricated, because the primary job of lubrication is to reduce friction. It's to reduce the mechanical effort. And because the tap is so brittle and it's so predisposed to just breaking and ruining your day, okay, you need to keep it as slippery as possible. You need to also have mechanical sympathy, so you can reduce the load on the tap by having mechanical sympathy as you go through the motions. But the primary countermeasure is lubrication. And my favorite lubricant here is the old Trefolex, because I've been using it for 40 years. And any tool, the motto of which is thick fluid sticks on the tool. That just reaches out and touches me. I don't know why, but I can relate to it at a deep level. It's great stuff. And if you try back to back, just normal oil versus Trefolex, you will notice a distinct reduction in the effort when you actually start turning and burning with your tap wrench. Trefolex is really good stuff for tapping. I don't know what it is about it. I don't know if they've changed the formula, but tapping ends in tears if you don't use sufficient lubricant. And if you could go back in time, if you're staring at a broken tap in a hole somewhere and you think, if only I'd taken the 30 seconds to walk over the shelf and grab the Trefolex and just saturate the bloody job with it, you would go back in time anytime. You do a deal with Satan to make that happen. So, lubrication, dude. Tip number 4 is all about 2 things. It's all about mechanical sympathy and understanding the mechanics of the process with the particular kind of tap you're using. So today we're using the kind of tap that statistically everyone's got, which is a straight fluted tap. And that tap is amenable in every case to binding up on the chips that it is cutting. And just for disambiguation, anytime you're doing a cutting operation on metal, you generate chips. Chips are just the generic term for the waste. So in this case, it's the valley of the thread that we are carving out down in there with the tap. It's a little curly piece of metal that binds up inside the flute that's been ground in the tap. And if you cut too much, you'll get too much of that chip in there and it will jam the tap in place. And then when you try and back it off, it will break. If you try and muscle it through, it will break. You're trapped in a living hell in that situation. And Trefolex alone is not enough to extract you. So you need mechanical sympathy. You need to feel for the chips, because all materials are different. Some taps have 3 flutes, some have 4. So a different amount of angular deflection is necessary, if you like, to bind it up, depending on the size and the material and the number of flutes. And all you can do as a countermeasure is feel it. So what I generally do is I go into tapping mode. I load tapping mode in my program, in my operating system, and then I feel where the tap is, like that's where the cutting edge is starting, and I just put between half and 1 turn in place, and I just see how that kind of feels. So there's half a turn, and we'll go for 3/4, and that's starting to feel like the danger zone. So then we back off, and when you back off, you get to this point where it starts to feel hard, and then boom, it gets easy, okay? And you just do that repeat. So that's half a turn there. We'll do 3/4, we'll back up, and that's where it's binding, and we'll just break that chip off, right? And all we're going to do is we're just going to keep going through there like that. And really, I'm not so much counting, although it's a good idea to count before you get good at this. I'm just kind of feeling for the load and whether it's building up or not. And I stop before I get to the broken tap. And in this case in particular, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at how far down in the hole I'm getting, because I don't want to go all the way through. The thing with fixture plates is that I don't want a complete full thread all the way through. I want to stop about, 2 threads up, because I don't want the stud that I'm putting in here to jack itself down into the base of the vise, right? I want to come up a little bit from there. So I want that to just be a little bit tapered. So I'm just going to keep going here until I get about 2 of those tapered threads out the bottom of the hole. And sorry, you've got to join me on this fairly monotonous process, but I think we're nearly there. Probably got another couple of turns to go. The other thing is you've got to be careful about Satan's fingernails, because sometimes the chips can be pretty sharp, and you've got to not jam them into yourself if you can possibly avoid it. And if it all starts to feel terribly hard, like that's starting to feel a bit hard now, it may be because the tap is getting just ever so slightly bound up with chips, and it's getting hard for the tap to eject further chips into that mess, right? The other thing about taps is that they're really designed only to be decent, I guess is the term. They're only designed to be decent at holes that are about the same diameter as the tap. And this is 20 millimeters thick, and the hole itself is like 12, right? So we're really tapping quite a deep hole here. And that is hard work for the tap, because a lot of the cutting edges are engaged, and it's just not as easy as it would be if the hole were slightly shallower. So then you just have to find your way back in there. And now that we've got the flutes a little bit more open, this should get a bit easier. So that's something to watch for as well. And mechanical sympathy is a thing. See how much easier that is? It's because the chips that we're cutting out, those little valleys that we're cutting out, now have open space inside those flutes to go into. So discretion is often the better part of valor there, and we're a couple of threads down, and that means most likely the thread is just deep enough without being deep enough to allow the stud to jack the base off the to jack the fixture plate off the vise. So we'll just check that. Here's one of these studs, and of course it'll bind because I haven't blown it out with the compressed air yet. Yeah, that's good. I can just touch the stud, but it's not coming out the bottom of the hole, so I can't jack the plate off the vise, which is exactly right. So I'll just do another. I've done 5. I've just got 16 more to go, like that. But I'm not going to detain you with the other 16 because we've got to move on and get to point number 5, is that the aspect ratio of the hole really matters. This is a fancy way, I guess, of saying the depth. It's the depth relative to the diameter of the tap. So if you're drilling a hole in a piece of steel for a 12 millimeter tap, if it's a 12 millimeter tap and the steel's 12 millimeters thick, then the aspect ratio is 1. And frankly, these taps are designed not to exceed an aspect ratio of 1, which was why in the previous tip I ended up with that problem with the chipsaw binding, because this is substantially deeper than an aspect ratio of 1. That's something you've got to bear in mind. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got all these dills on YouTube using spiral point or spiral fluted taps to power tap, I don't know, an M10 hole in a piece of 3mm steel. So M10 by 1.5, 3mm steel, you're going to have 2 threads of engagement in a piece of steel like that. So your M10 fastener is way over the odds for that, because it's only got 2 threads engaged, and therefore the fastener's not going to work very efficiently. If you need M10 to do the job, it's not going to break, but it'll pull out of the hole because not enough threads are engaged. Like if you look at an M12 nut, it's probably about 9 or 10mm thick. And that means that you're going to have about 5 threads of engagement. So 5 threads of engagement are pretty good for most mediocre bolting jobs in most materials, including the cheese of steel, which we have here, which is hot rolled low carbon steel, structural type steel. The other problem about the aspect ratio of the hole is, as the aspect ratio increases, so as the hole gets deeper relative to the size of the tap, the implications of being misaligned. So if this hole is straight up and down now, and it would want to be because I drilled it in a vise on the drill press, if I start tapping it, this is exaggerated, but if I start tapping it like this, if it's thin metal, I'll probably get away with that. But if it's thick metal, the deeper I get with the tapping process, the more the angle of misalignment is going to be the same the whole time, but the actual deviation of the tip of the tap off the axis of the hole is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger the further I go. And that means that one of these flutes is going to be doing a hell of a lot of cutting, right? More cutting than it was designed to do. So if you get in there misaligned on a deep aspect ratio hole, you're going to break the tap, because the amount of load required to tap the thread off axis, you'd probably only be a little bit off like that, you know, and everyone thinks they're a Jedi. They can just be completely orthogonal using their strange mental powers, but I'd suggest none of us can do that. It's always better if you've got something to assist you. So to prevent that happening, if you are tapping a hole with an aspect ratio greater than 1, so if it's a M12 hole through 14mm plate, or M10 through 12mm plate, or something of that nature, a deep hole relative to the diameter of the tap, you need to do something. You need to have a countermeasure in place against misalignment, because that is a major breaker of taps and a major reason for you to scrap the part. So what can you do? I'd suggest this is a lay down Mazaire proposition for your 1, 2, 3 blocks, because if you clean the surface, you get your 1, 2, 3 blocks on a hole in the corner somewhere like that, you will have a reference that you can look at for alignment, and it will tell you if you're off this way or if you're off that way. So you've got 2 axis worth of alignment tests just like that. Now I would clamp them to the plate, and I'd just therefore have both hands to just get the job done here, right? That's not a bad way of doing it. There are plenty of other things. If you don't have 1, 2, 3 blocks, there are plenty of square things that you can just grab in your shed and use them for alignment. Or you can get yourself a piece of offcut plate like this, and you don't have to go to the lengths I've gone to here with squaring it up and bluing it. You just need to get a piece of structural offcut, about 20 to 25mm thick, and drill holes. These are every hole in millimetre increments from 13 down to 3. And basically, you just use that, and you find the one that suits your tap. So in this case, the 12mm one, there's not very much clearance in any of that. You know, if I'm misaligned that much, that's going to be okay. So what I would do there is I get the 12 hole and I put it straight on top of the hole that I've drilled. I'd get down there, I'd feel for it to engage, I'd clamp this to the table, and I'd just get it started. and I get it like maybe 2 threads in, and then I can just remove this. The tap will stay up and down because it'll have 2 or 3 threads of engagement. Then you put the tap wrench back on, you get going. However, because I drilled all of these 21 holes in the drill press with a vise, and it's still sitting there, the easiest way to get every hole started is just to go back to the drill press. So why don't you come over there with me and we'll finish this video over there. For me, this is just part of the process. I do it with every hole. It's convenient because the drill press is here, and I used it just like this to drill all the holes, so it's still just set up. The vise is floating on the table. It's a much bigger vise than I'd normally use on this drill press, but it was pretty good for drilling these holes in the plate because it's so heavy and it prevents the drill from catching anything and spinning it out of control. I've got the vise up against the column here for counter rotation, and what I'm going to do is just drop the spindle down and get the hole roughly in place here. It only has to be rough because that's rough enough, because then as I start to spin it, it will self-center, and I'll just get a bit of thick fluid stays on the tool in action because we want to reduce the tool pressure here. And I know a whole bunch of machinist heads are exploding at the moment because I've got the tap in the chuck, but hey, it's going to be just fine. It's not like we're powering the machine up, you know, and the worst thing that'll happen is the tap will just spin in the chuck. We'll get that in a second. I've got moderate pressure down on the press part of the drill press, and I'm just going to turn the chuck by hand until I can't rotate it any further, which is coming up. So we've only got a small amount of engagement here, maybe half a turn, something like that. That'll be enough though, because when we undo the chuck, I've got to get in your way a bit here to stop the handle flicking back and hitting me in the head, but there you go. The tap is set up. It's reasonably firmly in place, and as long as I've got mechanical sympathy, if the vise was broken down, I could tap it here. I could just get the tap wrench on it and go for it here, but I'm going to move it back over to the vise, the other vise, and get going again on it, but pretty clearly you could go for it here. It's just when you start backing off, it becomes problematic. So anyway, I'm back to the vise. I'm going to do all that tapping. Thanks very much for watching. I hope this has helped you not break a whole bunch of taps in the future.